Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.
Dearest fantasy readers, welcome to the Dear Fantasy Reader podcast, where two best friends, Hannah and Karen, travel through the pages of our favorite romantasy novels. Join us as we take flight into the world of the Empyrean series, diving deep into the chapters, exploring characters, scenes, theories, foreshadowing, and more, taking what we've learned from the second book, Iron Flame, to reread and re-experience the first.
With that content warning and spoiler alert, we will be covering anything and everything Empyrean series to this date and any content Rebecca Yarros has given us. Also, due to the nature of these books, this podcast is rated R in content and in language.
Boy, it is, because we got a spicy, mildly spicy, but the spiciest Xaden POV chapter yet.
Oh my
Brand
gosh.
new paperback edition of Fourth Wing with chapter 27, which was our number 2 most wanted. I would say, I think I even talked myself up to it being my number 1 there by the end.
You did.
And you can see me convince Karen into it being her number 2 in real time in our predictions bonus episode. But honestly, as much as I wanted that first kiss scene, and I really did think it was going to be that, I am beyond ecstatic that this is the chapter that we got. And we are going to talk about all of the reasons why today.
It wasn't even on my radar at first because I hadn't thought about this even being a possibility. I was trying to think of really specific times where he would have been shielding. That would have made sense. And you brought it to our episode where we talked about that's what we wanted. And I was just like, okay, now this kind of like bumped up to my number 2, like you said. But I'm convinced that you and I, especially you, have intense manifestation powers. Oh, I'm so glad that you brought it to my attention. It was so good.
Well, and that was kind of the cool thing about the timing of it all, is we were supposed to record, we'd already had it outlined, our Violet's POV chapter 27 the week before, and some things happened and that didn't work out. And so we ended up having this bonus chapter come out right before. So when we release that episode, it will include the context and insights that we get from this new chapter from Xaden's point of view. But for the sake of this episode, we are going to be diving solely into Xaden's point of view, all of the things that we got, which were so many insights in unexpected ways, I think, for many of them. And I'm just like, we got a new Xaden POV. You'd have told me 2 months ago that we would have gotten chapter 27. I'd have been like, yeah, okay, cool. Right.
2 months ago, I didn't even know that there was Xaden POVs. Like,
that's right. You didn't. Well, I would have been around that time that I let you know about 9 and 16. And I was like, okay, well, we're going to wait for those episodes for you to read them. And now I've got you hooked. So,
so true.
Now, time for our summary report of chapter 27, Xaden's POV, from our personal scribe informant, Karen.
As the winners of the squad battle, Fourth Wing has earned the opportunity to visit one of the less dangerous outposts, Montserrat, and Xaden and Sigale have flown out to meet them. We are officially seeing Mira's battle breath from Xaden's point of view. First and foremost, Dane Atos is dancing on Xaden's last fucking nerve.
And
Relatable.
all of ours as well.
So true. As they are going over the different strategies the squad could perform for a specific scenario, the boys are having a little bit of a power struggle, and then Xaden successfully speaks into Violet's mind through their bond, and also floods the room with his shadows to prove a point, which definitely worked. After the strategy exercise is over, Mira dismisses everyone except for Violet, Xaden, and Dane. She calls Dane out, basically telling him to get his shit together. She also warns Violet about Xaden and worries he is compromising her learning and turning her into one of his shadows. Suddenly, the wards go down and a flight of griffins, not the friendly ones, are poised for the attack. Mira orders Xaden to get Violet out and to keep her safe. Violet protests, fighting him back all the way to grab their bags. Xaden finds Liam in their room where he demands to know if the attack was their fault. Xaden assures him that it was not their fault or the griffin flyers they were helping. They all climb to the roof to mount their dragons, when all but Xaden and Violet are left waiting for Taryn and Sigale. Xaden realizes that Violet is going to bolt. Knowing Violet may never forgive him, he accepts the consequences in the name of keeping her safe and distracts her with a kiss.
So good. So good. Because the end is so much more meaningful now, knowing what we do and find out in his point of view, that I told myself was the case with Violet's point of view, but it was, she didn't think so. So the confirmation that we get in this chapter, among confirmation of so much, you know what? This was why I wanted this chapter specifically. We talked about it in our predictions bonus episode, because our number 2 and number 3 prior to this last minute addition were not chapters where we'd seen this transition with Xaden. What I suspected was just falling for her. We know he says he fell in love with the first kiss, but I thought that was all retrospect, right? Boy, did we find out that while, yes, he's still fighting the feelings in like different ways than I expected, he full on says that he loves her 3 times in 2 pages in this chapter. Oh my God.
What? I was just like, hold on. And the first time he says it, I reread the sentence like 5 times because I was like, oh, he straight up admitted it to himself. And I did not expect that. I kind of thought that he felt it, but I didn't expect him to be like, oh, I love her. Like very, yeah.
Or without judgment, because any slight feeling that he's had, even like when he would think about her smelling good, he would cut himself off, or Sigale would, or there was some sort of like judgment of his own thoughts. He really, really fought back on his own thoughts. And when he says it in this chapter, there's no judgment of his own feelings at that point. He's just kind of accepted them.
Yeah.
And I was really not thinking that he was at that point. Of course, as we're reading Fourth Wing for the first time, but even on this third reread, I was thinking, no, the reason he's pulled away is because he's been in denial. No, we find out so much more that he was genuinely in love with her to the point where he had prioritized the perception of her by her peers, essentially, over his own love for her and like her knowing and reciprocating.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that. It's such like a fun thing that we got to see.
Oh, it gives me chills. And I know Rebecca knows that that's what we love about Xaden, is eventually he does get to that like full-fledged, I love you. Like, we're realistic that there's definitely some things about this that make it complicated. I just wasn't expecting it so soon. And that was really nice to finally see, especially as we are prepping for the next time we read about him. unless she does do holiday bonus chapters for Iron Flame. I'm just throwing it out that she's hinted at it. But maybe she doesn't. And then the next time we see him is Onyx Storm after he's done this big sacrifice. So it's just all of that is like way more intense to know how long he's loved her to really set up for that huge sacrifice for love.
I just had a thought.
I love it when that happens.
It's far and few between. No, just kidding. What if Rebecca switches to a dual POV when they're not together?
I think someone's asked her about that in a Q&A. I'm like 99.13% sure that they've asked her about it. What she said, I believe, was that she's not going to change POVs because she wants us to continue learning with Violet. And that we're not going to get more POVs until Xaden stops keeping secrets.
But that's a very specific wording.
Right. So maybe once he does say book 5, I don't know. I'm not expecting it to be book 3 the way that she's talking about it. So say book 4 or 5, and maybe she does switch to dual. But then it's like if they're not together, then I don't want dual of them just wishing they were together.
If it was dual POV and they were apart, you would know what he was doing and how he was fighting to get to her.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I just really don't want them to be separated at all. So I guess that's, context. Before we dive in, we are implementing a new thing where we use our Swiftie signets to create a playlist of Taylor Swift songs that best fit the chapters that we're covering each week. And I actually thought of so many for this chapter specifically. So if you love this chapter as much as we did, I highly recommend checking out The Archer, Treacherous, I Can See You, and You Are in Love.
Oh, You Are in Love's my fave.
And we will be posting which lyrics specifically we're referencing on our social media over on Instagram if you'd like to check it out. With that, drum roll, Dragon Riders, as we are officially diving into the new Xaden POV chapter 27. Right off the bat, we find out that the theories about Imogen going missing and Xaden's pack being smaller when he leaves, meaning that she ran a secret smuggle run mission, were true. Xaden tells us that Imogen faked being sick, used her memory wiping signet on the healer, went off to deliver daggers to Serena, and should be on her way back if she's on schedule, which is an interesting way to word that. How cool that we weren't crazy. Rebecca does intentionally give us these tiny clues that play so largely into the bigger picture. So affirming.
Rebecca Yarros is honestly just like so freaking clever.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to know, like, whenever she was writing Fourth Wing, if she was also plotting what Xaden and the Marked Ones were doing, or like anybody else were doing in each scene. Because whenever I read chapter 27, I didn't even really register that Imogen wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was so sneaky.
Well, and I thought when I read it, it was interesting that she listed out all of the characters and then split them up and stuff. We now know she does that intentionally, right? So if we see that there's not someone mentioned, which we'll come back to when we talk about the end of Iron Flame, we should take note. And she has basically said that she did go into Fourth Wing leaving things like that because she did have all of the major plot points plotted out for all of the books. And so what she says is she has an Excel spreadsheet and she has all the main points and she'll go back and look and she hasn't marked where any Easter egg is and where there's room for more or where she needs to put one to set up for something later on, which is kind of insane in the best way. I love that she does that.
My brain would never be able to.
Yeah, no, I think that mine would.
Yeah,
but
would.
Yeah, I'll be like, it would. And as we said earlier, one of my favorite things about this chapter is that we really get context about the why Xaden is pulling away and why he's so distant when it's not because he was in denial. He wasn't fighting that. He actually had accepted it. And this is shown when he was daydreaming about Violet. He thinks Every writer in this room would look at her differently, and not in a good way. Leave it to me to fall for the one woman on the continent that I can never fucking have. First of all, a moment for that last line, because
It made me sad.
yeah, it was like, oh, and then yeah, it's kind of somber to think about that we're getting that context from him. It's very like selfless perspective for him to have. And I found it really eye-opening that Xaden is worried about her being seen differently for being with him because of his relic and backstory with that, and not just because he's her wing leader. So it wasn't, we thought maybe Violet kept bringing up that it was a rank issue. It's not a rank issue. He's got so much going on, so much she doesn't even know, that it's not just that his father, the perception of other Navarians that his father was killed for this rebellion. He knows at some point, and we find out later that they mention eventually they're going to be making their way to the Forge in Orisha, that the Marked Ones will not be staying with Navarre in active service. So he knows he has this trajectory for his life that is one of a rebel, right? A revolutionary that he would be dragging her into. And as much as I like to think I think really deeply about these books, that's not really something I had super dove into with thinking about at the very beginning of their relationship. It wasn't until later. It's just one of the many reasons I love reading his perspective, because Rebecca really just teases that out for us.
Oh, now I don't think I had ever thought about if he leaves because they're dragons. If she decided to stay and he had to leave.
So say things didn't work out like they did in Fourth Wing to be disrupted. Well, then it's like a matter of fate, right? Like things are likely fated to have played out like this. But you're right. Back at this point for him, he's thinking that's not happening for years, which again is something that's really important to consider from his perspective.
That kind of just blew my mind because I hadn't even thought of that either. But back to also like the rank thing. And it really does show how much he cares more about her and how being with the son of a traitor would affect her. But then it kind of makes me think of Dane in contrast of how he told her he couldn't be with her because of the way it would look for him. Ugh.
What a point you got there. Yeah, really great point. I have no faith in Dane.
No, me neither.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm not surprised anymore by anything, but it's a good point. Such a contrast, right? Well, and I also, I mentioned it earlier that we were going to be throwing Taylor Swift songs in here. The one I want to give context about, because I really do feel like it's Xaden's song, is The Archer. The line specifically, when I read this portion of it, I immediately started playing it in my head. Who could ever leave me, darling, but who could stay? And then we think about Xaden's perspective as the oldest marked one, the child whose father was the leader of the rebellion and lost his life over it, leaving Xaden, and whose mother abandoned him at age 10. Who could ever leave him, but who could stay?
I'm gonna cry.
Really, just, there's one little portion, too, of the lyrics. I wake in the night, I pace like a ghost. The room is on fire, invisible smoke. All of my heroes die all alone. Help me hold on to you. Sorry about it, but I had to think of that, so now you all have to think about it. And if you really think about the trajectory of where we know Xaden is going, right now he doesn't have her to hold on to, but eventually he will. This song it's Xaden's song to me. Especially now with him turning Venom. Who could ever leave me, darling, but who could stay? I can't. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh. I love The Archer because it's such a good representation of anxiety to me. Oh, but now you've also pointed it out and it fits his situation so well and it's hurting my heart a little bit.
So that's I think overarching message that I really got from this chapter. But let's get into the details. So right after this, he says that he intentionally put himself between Violet and Liam. Quote, "There's nothing going on there, but he can back the fuck up when I'm around." I can't even get it out because it took me off guard, him talking about like Liam of all people like that.
And then he also thinks, "Still, I'd put myself in between her and Liam, ignoring his little smirk when I took the chair closest to Violet."
Mm-hmm.
Liam knows how he feels about Violet. I also loved that little tidbit. Oh, it was so good. And we also saw this with Garrick, and I just love that his best friends know him so well and just can see it. I just love it.
I know, and it's one of the things we said we wanted out of this chapter. And it's not even just that Liam knows with that knowing little smirk. Mm-hmm. It was also that he's really gotten close to Violet. And he knows Violet's also falling. He knows what's coming. He's just along for the ride at this point.
Oh, and I love it. Not enough Garrick for me in this chapter because we know I have a crush on Garrick, but I love the Liam bits too. Now on to somebody I don't love because we're going to talk about Dane for a moment. The very first line in the chapter says, quote, "Dane Atos is dancing on my last fucking nerve." And if that doesn't just sum up all of the Dane portions of this chapter, I don't know what does. You know?
No, it is. It's perfect. Just enough said. Not even just this chapter. That's like all of Fourth Wing for me.
The whole book. I'm going to actually print out that quote and put it behind me as well.
We just like get shirts made. Dane Atos is dancing on my last fucking nerve.
We've talked a little bit about how we don't really think that Dane shows any good leadership skills that we've seen. And in this entire scene, he just continues to prove our thoughts about him not having these good leadership skills. He's not focused on helping his subordinates learn how to think strategically or how to use their signets and skills for battle. And he's only focused on Xaden and like his jealousy over Violet. And Xaden is loving seeing Dane just pretty much come undone. And he's like trying to look intimidating by staring Xaden down, even though Xaden wins that battle.
Yeah, and you know what? That like I win line, I paused at that part because I love that you find it very satisfying. I didn't. I thought, I thought it showed Xaden's age and where he has room to grow himself in the maturity department. Like, we get it. He hates Dane. And I guess, he is like staring right at him. But Xaden totally missed Violet staring at him and from her POV, right? Because he was so busy staring at Dane.
That's a good point. I kind of like the pettiness.
I see that you do, and I'll give him a little room because he's got, you know, a rebellion on his shoulders and like 107 people, so he has a little room to be immature for me, but that's probably one of two main things that I will point out that is negative about Xaden in this chapter, but the rest are all overwhelmingly positive. And eventually he does turn his attention to a concentrated Violet and her pursed lips and thinks, gods, that mouth. I dream about that mouth, fantasize about that mouth. That kiss is burned into my memory like a relic, taunting me with what will never happen again, with what I never should have tasted in the first place.
Okay. Oh, he's down bad.
Oh, he is. But that whole burn into my memory like a relic, interesting choice of words. Is that giving fated mates?
It could be. Do humans have mates in these books?
I know that Rebecca has said in an interview that she really loved the fated mates trope and wanted to play with what that looks like for the dragons, but she didn't ever imply that it wouldn't also be the case. And if we think about a prophecy, I'm never going to shut up about the prophecy. I think that that's the hill I'm willing to die on. Right after this, he lifts his shields just enough to see Violet's silvery bond strengthening. He even asks Gale why Tairn hasn't told Violet about their mind bond connection, and then she didn't respond to him. Why didn't Tairn tell her?
I would like to know too.
He is a good character.
Yeah.
But it is notable that he's kept quite a few things
From our girl who
needs information. But at the same time, one, it made it better to read. But two, I don't know if she was mentally stable enough. I say mentally, emotionally stable enough at this point, right? Like, that's why they had to wait to channel. But then you'd think after that, maybe it would have been too messy, and Tairn was like, I am just letting you figure it out. I'm an old man. I don't have time for this shit. Maybe that was his perspective on it. I don't know. And then we get this part I was most hopeful for when I chose this chapter as my number 2 pick, when Xaden finally speaks into Violet's mind for the very first time. So this comes after Liam points out to Dane that our wing leader is here. I would say that puts him in command. And Xaden can feel Violet's intense emotion of pride skitter down their bond, solidifying their connection, which I think is probably the most special way that Rebecca could have written it, to have it be about her emotion for Liam. That's the favorite part.
I'm so glad you pointed this out, because when I read it, I wasn't sure if she was like pride for Xaden doing so well at Baskythe, or if she was proud of Liam for standing up to Dane.
You know, now that you say that, I actually could see it being both. Because Liam says, our wing leader is here, so clearly he's talking about Xaden. I would say that puts him in command. When Dane had just kind of like propped himself up, I don't know now. I could see it both ways.
Yeah, I agree with you, though. I feel like it's because of Liam.
Either way, I think it's really special. But right after this, Xaden describes being able to speak to Violet through their bond as instantly vital to his existence. I reread that line like multiple times. So good. Also, fated mates. I'm just throwing it out there. Like,
I just like,
it's
what
so
a squeal.
good. It's the way that he thinks about her in this chapter. No, it's great. It's fantastic.
And this is why we need all of the Xaden POV chapters, because Violet, she's a good narrator because she doesn't know so much. So it's good for us. Like you were saying, Rebecca Yarros did this because we're learning alongside her. But now getting to go back in hindsight and getting his thoughts during all these moments is just chef's kiss.
It's so good. And I would really love to see, because we got a big jump, right? 9, then 16, then 27. I really think eventually, I really hope that she does do the first kiss scene, though I see why she would want to avoid that for spoilers. I like to think she's going to write more so that we get to see more of the progression over time, because we did jump quite a bit between 16 and 27. But, you know, another moment. This whole stretch was why I picked this chapter's fave. So Xaden and Violet are sharing this really, I mean, we're going to talk way more about this when we get to the whole Violet's POV herself episode, but the fact that they can speak into each other's minds, then we get to see it from Xaden, is incredible. Okay? We're in their heads. Everyone else in the room is not. And so they're sharing this cute and flirty, silent moment in front of everyone. And I've always wondered how no one noticed this based on Violet's perspective, right? But I guess she was a little preoccupied to comment, you know, or even notice anyone else notice. But then we found out in Xaden's POV, Dane did notice. Xaden thinks to himself, I wink and turn my attention back to the seething pot of jealousy boiling over across the table. First of all, description is incredible. You're the wing leader. Dane chokes out the words, and I can't help but wonder if he's submitting to my rank or accusing me of inappropriate behavior with a subordinate. I, kind of choked reading this part because I had always assumed that Dane was submitting to his rank, unwillingly, but, just being, salty about it. But now I 100% see this as Dane calling Xaden out over the obvious flirting with Violet, because the wink. Everything else was silent, so it could have just been this awkward, we're just staring at each other moment, but the wink, okay? That clued everyone in.
It's so funny to me. Everyone had to have noticed something. Yeah. There's no way they didn't notice something was happening, and especially when Violet responded out loud, because she did respond out loud a couple of times. Or elbowing him or stuff like that.
That's true. You're right. Yeah.
Why did she just elbow him? That was weird. But I saw a TikTok the other day, and it was Violet and Xaden having an argument in front of everyone, and it was just two people standing in front of a wall, and they were kind of moving their heads like you would in an argument, but not speaking. It was so funny. I went back and I tried to find it, could not find it anywhere. I searched and searched. I'm so sad that I can't link that for everybody, but
if we come across it again, we would try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back to Dane, I also see this as him actually calling Xaden out for flirting with his subordinate.
Oh, yeah. And I never would have gotten that without Xaden's perspective on it. So fantastic moment, which, I also think was partly because Dane pretends to not know later. He pretends to be shocked that there's something between them. He chalked it up to just rumors. And it's how do you see Xaden of all people doing the wink and this whole thing and not just be oh no, they're sounds like Dane was the one in denial.
Denial is a river in Egypt. Sorry, I know that TikTok sound.
Yes. But what followed had my jaw on the fucking floor. Quote, because it deserves its own reading. If I can get through it. Not that I give a fuck either way. First of all, love that Xaden was I don't give a fuck which way, what he thinks. If it were safe for Violet, I'd be ecstatically guilty of inappropriate behavior, wickedly inappropriate, in my bed, in hers, on a table in the archives? In the bathing chamber, foreshadowing, and every room with a door to lock so no one can see what else is mine. I'd be so decadently inappropriate that her voice would turn hoarse from screaming my name every single day. But though she'd be the best thing that ever happened to me, I'd be the worst thing that ever happened to her. The truth of it sinks like a stone in my stomach. Talk about whiplash.
I was about to say, the flip on that, because we're over here oh my gosh, and we're our faces are getting red, we're fangirling, and then gut punch, oh my gosh.
Well, first of all, I was on a plane in a middle seat when I was reading this chapter, and when I tell you I did a peek to see if either of the people beside me were also enjoying this spicy moment. I'm turning a little red and I'm they don't see it. They don't see it. And if they do, you're welcome. But all things considered, it really emphasizes, again, his reasoning for prior distance and restraint up into this point. And we just really see him start to just not give a fuck at all about his own thoughts. And he's you know what? At the very least, if I can't have her, I'm at least going to be able to think about it. And finally, right? And then we get my favorite moment in the chapter, which is kind of crazy to follow that excerpt to say that wasn't my favorite moment. It's a top. But when Dane questions why Xaden is even there, Sigale mocks him, saying, "Yes, why are you here?" And Xaden points out that it was Sigale's idea to bring the daggers. And she comes back quick with, It seemed a prudent course of action considering your insufferable intolerance to being separated from the general's daughter. And then, where's Violet now? What is she doing? Is she thinking of me? Is she missing me? Is she getting closer to Atos? Does she dream about that kiss? How many days until Violet? And then he cuts her off.
Oh my gosh.
It's so good.
This was my favorite, my favorite quote from the whole chapter.
Yeah.
Because, of course, Sigale's sass, but it also gives us insights of what Xaden was actually thinking before he wasn't with Violet, which is more of what we wanted to see.
Mm-hmm. And even though it sounds like an exaggerated version, I'm sure every single one of those questions crossed his mind. And I know that he says he chalks it up to her being by the border, so he's worried about her. And I do think that that is part of it. But Sigale points in there, is she thinking of me? Is she missing me? Is she getting closer to Atos? Does she dream about that kiss? All of those things are you would have worried no matter where she was. You'd have been wondering about her no matter where she was. And I eat that up. Do you remember in episode 10 where we talked about how badly I wanted to know if he fell first?
Mm-hmm.
And then you were like, well, what if he doesn't fall first, but he fell harder?
Yeah.
And I say, well, what if he fell first and harder?
Is this confirmation?
I'm taking this as full confirmation because Violet hasn't even really let herself think of him like that yet. She's really stuck to it being sexual, even though she has moments where it's that's not lust, girl. You keep calling it that. But this was ahead of her time. Yeah, no, he fell first and harder. I told you guys the trifecta, and here we are.
It's what all of us deserve.
It is. It is. And Xaden deserves that too when he gets it eventually. You know, she might not have fell first, but she definitely does hardcore coming up. And he told her not to. So, we can't blame her. But all of this is happening while Xaden is having a verbal conversation with Dane. And then Violet steps in and defends him, blaming Taryn and Sigale, and Xaden thinks, there she goes again, defending me. Fuck, I love this woman. And there it is. Fell harder and first. Back to back. Confirmation. Yeah, no, this is fully confirmation. I think I thought I was crazy reading it when I first read this, because that's the first time he says it. And just straight in, no hesitation.
I'm still speechless, but I was so shocked because I wasn't expecting that in this chapter at all. And I had to stop. And I was like, what? And then he says it 3 times.
Within 2 pages. It's on the same open book 2 pages, all 3 of them.
I didn't realize it was that close together.
Yeah. When I did a second read of it, I was like, okay. And when I first read it, I fully gasped, and I think I'm still not over it. We've mentioned it a couple times, so I think it's clear at this point we're still not over it. But it's honestly one of the biggest things piece of context that we got out of this chapter.
Right. We thought maybe it was in hindsight that he loved her from their first kiss, but I didn't expect to see this. And especially, I didn't expect him to admit it to himself before they ever started hooking up, because he tells her very clearly when they start hooking up, do not fall for me, because he was already in love with her at this point. I'm just
so my thoughts with that, because I thought the same thing, was one of 2 things happened. He either fully admitted it to himself and realized it when he kissed her, right? Or clearly he had some indication and was in denial for at least that next little stretch, because remember, he doesn't talk to her after that. He lost a little points when we talked about it of why are you not? This is why. And I thought it was in denial, but maybe 1, it could have been him in denial, or 2, what we find out is he's just really freaked out about what it could mean for Violet and knows he can't have her. Leave it to him to fall for the one woman on this continent that he can't fucking have. Right? That line tells us what he's been thinking likely since their first kiss. And he probably thought that to himself before he kissed her was, you can't have her. You need to tread lightly for your own sake. And we know that he pulled away from Violet and said he was worried about her intentions going into it and things like that, like influence and whatnot. But maybe it was he got freaked out because he realized he was falling quick and that this was going to hurt.
Oof.
Well, that chapter is a POV. But now we know all of this going into the next couple chapters. Well, the rest of the book, but really it's monumental leading up to their first time and where he says, you can't fall for me. So we will definitely be getting into that.
If you want to see Hannah and I freak out.
Just wait. You guys think you've seen it. You haven't seen nothing yet. And I have to say that his next line here is top 3 favorite quotes in the whole book for me. Which...
Whole book.
He speaks directly into her mind. You never considered that it was you I couldn't stay away from.
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't have written, especially at this point where he's done this whole like, no, we can't kiss again. We can't. It was a mistake. He just says fuck it to everything in this chapter. And now we understand that line.
And reading it from Violet's point of view, I was thinking he's just being sarcastic or just playfully flirting. But no, he was telling the truth. I'm obsessed.
I always interpreted it that he meant it genuinely. Because we had to see him falling at some point, right? So when I first, it's always been a top 3 line. That wasn't just because this chapter. It was my favorite because Violet takes that way, but I could see through it. And I was like, that's obvious to me. That's what I kept thinking about Violet. Like, girl, how do you not see that this shows he's serious? Like, he did actually. But boy, was I ecstatic to find out that it was confirmed that it was 100% he meant it genuinely. It really is one of my favorite moments in the whole book. And it for me is the turning point for their relationship. He really stepped up there and was probably the most honest he has been with her.
I figured he was flirting, but I didn't realize how genuine it was, really.
Well, I think that's partly because I romanticize Xaden a lot. Right? Like, I'm always, like, looking for ways, because even if it's not, like, it's all about my perception of the book I'm reading, right? Yeah. So for that one, I was fine with just telling myself that it was the case, but no, we know now how he really meant it, which just makes me want to, like, happy dance.
I want a gif of you doing that happy dance.
Love that. The one thing I will say that it does also tell us that we find out significantly in this chapter is that he is there because he couldn't stay away from Violet. But not just that, the mission that we suspected that he was a part of was an afterthought on Sigale's part. So it 100% was because of Xaden's feelings. And because that would be different, right? If he was already wanting to do a mission and then they just happened to show up, which was convenient because he got to see Violet. No. Sigale came up with it herself, not Xaden, after. So yeah, it's like basically like an excuse to go.
Did Sigale suggest this mission to kind of give him a reason to go? Or was it like, well, if we're going, we might as well do something useful?
It was implied because he says to her, it was your idea to get the daggers. And she says, well, you know, I thought it was the perfect opportunity because you were insufferable. So it sounds like she actually said, let's go do a smuggle run in Montserrat because he couldn't stay away from her. Like, he was insufferable for her. So it was Sigale's idea to go out. But all of that is a result of Xaden not being able to stay away from Violet.
I love it.
Oh, I love it. And you guys know, I just love it when our powers and romance intertwine. Can I tell you that this part gets me? It's because it's both sweet and it shows how Xaden's powers work on Paige, specifically his shadows. When Xaden floods the room with them to show his capabilities, he then crooks a finger and a strand of shadow solidifies to skim along Violet's cheek. Using powers for romance is like what I want in a romantasy.
Yeah.
It's my favorite part about reading. It's so good. And I also do want to note that here, Xaden does this as a response to panic skittering down their bond from Violet. And I wonder, does this imply that Violet has a fear of the dark? Like, I feel like this isn't the only time that that's been implied.
Ooh, that's interesting. I had never really considered, I guess, anyone in a war college to be afraid of the dark like that.
Yeah, but she was never going to be a writer, right? She's going to be a scribe.
True.
They don't stay after hours because the archives closed down. Ooh, I wonder if that's connected somehow.
You said it's like implied. Can you think of another one? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No,
I'm
you're
just
good.
wondering.
The thing that popped into my head was when they were in the cave in Iron Flame. I think that she implies there that she's afraid of the dark, and then they use her power or fire or something to light the way, and she feels a little bit better or something like that. Granted, it could also be chalked up to the fact they're in a scary cave, right?
You know, that's true.
But I think there's been something else that's the interrogation room was really dark. There's been other times I feel like we'll look out for that it's been implied. Leave it to Rebecca to tie something like that in.
And I love that he comforted her during that, feeling her like scared little moment.
Yeah, well, and I think also to be like balanced in our interpretations of this, from Violet's perspective, I just assumed she was actually afraid of Xaden's powers there because she knows how powerful he is, but like also he could quite literally snap all of their necks in that moment. Like to be severe, but like he has the capacity to do that. And no matter how many times you see that, that doesn't get less scary, you know, especially where she's still conflicted about him wanting to kill her. So now she's in pitch black next to him, and the pitch black is controlled by him. Yeah, which I thought was hot, but she's panicking, so it's fine. Anyways, jumping ahead a bit, Mira then takes Dane and Violet and Xaden out into the hallway. She finishes lecturing Dane and goes in on Violet. And this was really interesting in not a good way for me to see from Xaden's perspective. I'm going to say it as someone who doesn't really care much for Mira and defends Xaden to the grave. I didn't really enjoy his dynamic with Mira in this chapter. Especially here when he keeps thinking of killing her. It seems like such an immature stretch for the things that Mira was doing. I felt like it was just really inconsiderate of Violet's love for her sister as someone he now loves. And I don't, you know, I've said it before, I don't really care for Mira in Iron Flame, but I really grew to like her more in this set of chapters, specifically rereading 26 and 27 with Violet. So it just really stood out to me like not a great way.
Yeah, I didn't think Violet deserved so much of Mira going in on her, but I do feel like I have been more lenient towards Mira and do like her most of the time. But I did find it pretty jarring that he was like over here dreaming about killing her.
Right. That's kind of, yeah.
But he does mention it could appease the burning need for revenge I've learned to live with. Yeah. But it wouldn't be worth it to hurt Violet and Brennan. I kind of don't see it out of character for him, though.
No.
I think it was just more of a backslide into who he was before the growth we've seen from him.
Right.
I think it's a combination of his like revenge that he still has. He still hates General Sorrengail, but also fiercely defensive of Violet now.
And it makes sense because he still wanted to kill Violet, you know, for a while there and was contemplating it. And so for someone who gives him like any reason, you know, and he loves Brennan and he loves Violet. And so now he's like, well, there's one annoying sibling left. Just take her out. And then, you know, and that's also kind of the gray we get to see because we've said before, we don't really see a lot of gray. And
that was
Rebecca's
gray.
Pointed out that his gray is like, he doesn't really blink twice about killing people. Usually it's under like moral circumstances. And I think that that's what kind of shocked me a little bit here. But, you know, it was probably a way for Rebecca to remind us of his pain and flaws. And I definitely think that this is setting up for like a really rocky dynamic between Xaden and Mira in Onyx Storm, especially going in with her having like all the more reason to really demonize him.
Yeah, I'm nervous.
Only a couple more months. She's like feeding us breadcrumbs in the meantime.
Yeah.
A bonus chapter here. Hopefully a bonus chapter in the holidays.
I'm fine with another bonus chapter. Please give us another holiday one.
Iron Flame, because then we'd get to see his intensic signet more. Wink, wink. We're going to talk about that. But in this conversation, Mira asks Violet, do you even know why he hates our mother so much? Why the kids like him are put on the parapet? And Xaden cut her off there and thinks, oh, fuck no, she isn't ready to hear half of what their mother did to me. And I've seen comments from others who think that the she here he's referring to is Mira, thinking that this implies that Mira doesn't know all of the things. Frankly, I think he's talking about Violet. I interpreted this as him thinking that Violet isn't ready to hear half of what their mother did, which is why he cuts Mira off before she can go there and bring it all up, or any of it up.
I don't think he could care less about what Mira is or isn't ready to hear. He only cares about Violet here. So yeah, I totally agree with you. He's definitely thinking about Violet.
Yeah, the ready part makes me think it's Violet, but I could see him be like, Mira looks up to her mom. Like, she doesn't want to know half the shit that she's done. I still think it's Violet.
Yeah, and he thinks Mira looks up to her mom. I don't think Mira looks up to General Soren Gale that much.
Maybe it's because she's compared to being so much like her that I've always just felt like she strived to be like her. But Xaden is explaining to Mira here that he isn't trying to sabotage Violet. He thinks, I might be accomplishing a very risky run, but Sigale is right. We're here because I couldn't concentrate for shit. Knowing that Violet was this close to the border, I chose Violet over my wing. Which also makes me think that Dane's, you're the wing leader, why are you even here? Could also be like, you can't just drop your shit. Like you're stepping out on your leadership responsibilities. Ooh. But Dane can't say anything about anyone's leadership responsibilities. So I think it is important to note here that he didn't just miss her. He says that he's worried sick about her being so close to the border. He was worried for her safety. Mm-hmm. But again, I think that was all like, I think he was just using that as part of the excuse.
I so appreciated that he points out that he did not take her from where she was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. With him being so worried for her safety, do you think that he suspected this kind of attack could happen while they were going to be there? Or was he just worried in general?
I think probably a little bit of both, right? Because they're on the Signesen province border, which is not the Griffin flyers that he has like this common understanding with. That is like the Croveland province. They keep saying it's all these safe outposts and stuff, but Xaden knows that what they're learning about in Battle Brief is not a quarter of the attacks that are actually happening.
Yeah.
And so he knows that there's way more unrest and that Griffin flyers, no matter where they are getting desperate to get more daggers because the Venom are populating. There's more of them. They're trying to defend themselves and their people. So I think he was surprised. Yeah. I don't think he really thought that it was going to happen, but he just knows that, you know, say a couple years ago, that likely wasn't the case and he would have just been not as concerned. But there's a lot more context that he has at this point that would lead me to think that, he thought it was a possibility.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I think also we have to remember that the Griffin flyers are the one known enemy at this point.
Right.
So even though it's supposed to be a safe outpost, that's why they have dragons in service on watch constantly. It's not like an unexpected thing that there'd be attacks at somewhere that they've specifically put dragons.
Yeah, and that is supposed to be warded.
Right. Yeah, the ward is the most important part of this because Griffins aren't going to attack unless they know that they can use their magic, because dragon versus Griffin is like already no shot, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be really desperate. And that's what I'm trying to say is Xaden knew the desperation, but like it's supposed to be the safest because it's one of the most well warded. And the fact that Mira is there. Like, and she reinforces wards. We talk about this a bit when we cover Violet's perspective on chapter 27. It's very strange that, like, why would they have Mira at the safest outpost? But we really did get to see so much more of Sigale and Xaden's dynamic in this chapter. We've already touched on it a little bit earlier, but when Xaden thinks to himself that he needs to get his shit together and under control, Sigale, in a very on-brand, sassy yet caring way, says, "Love isn't something you get over. Why do you think I flew you all the way out here?" And, they have this playfully light banter with Xaden responding, "To mock me while cavorting with your mate," and Sigale coming back with, "I didn't say it was without its perks." It's so sweet, but I think this was such an important part of this chapter that we needed.
When we were talking about the chapters and what we wanted from it, we both mentioned that we wanted more of Xaden and Sigale's back and forth because we love her sass and her quick-witted comebacks. And I love this moment, even though she is being sweet. She is, like you said, she is being sassy and living for it. Especially her, I didn't say it was without its perks.
Oh, yeah. All of the dragons have such great personalities. And we don't get to see a lot of Sigale's because usually it's only aimed at, like, not a loving way at Violet, right? Because we have Violet's perspective. It's really, really telling. And I think goes deeper behind the sass, where we get such a crucial addition to this chapter for us to see, like, yeah, if Xaden died, Sigale would only be emotionally inconvenienced. But we see here that she loves Xaden. And they have an extremely deep bond. The next time that we read them is in Onyx Storm, where Rebecca has told us that Sigale feels betrayed by Xaden, who chose his love for Violet over his bond with Sigale, committing the worst betrayal a writer can by becoming Venin. And I just feel like we really needed to see how much she cared about him here, because we've only been told that she'd be emotionally inconvenienced, how deep their bond is to really enter Onyx Storm understanding Sigale's point of view and how much is at stake.
I know it's mentioned that she wouldn't die, but I feel like she loves him really deeply. And with how deeply she loves him, she is keeping secrets from her own mate, like you just said, and doing all of this secret missions, which I know we think that the dragons can kind of make their own decisions about it, but it also could have huge consequences for her. And she's doing all of this for him and for the cause. I don't understand how she wouldn't die if he did.
I don't either. I think I've been trying to tease it out. And one thing I will say is I have a theory that Taryn and Sigale changed sides on their own between Navarre and, like, the rebellion. At that point is what it was. After Naolan died or became Venin, whichever one we come to find out is true, because of what they saw in winning the rebellion. And I think that Sigale intentionally chose Xaden. I think she and the other dragons who choose marked ones, they did that intentionally. But that doesn't cut out the fact that she's still doing this, helping people that she didn't have to. Sigale's ruthless. She could be cozy in the Vale, not giving a shit what happens to these humans, right? So there's definitely a lot of backstory there that we just don't know. And I've really been trying to tease out what the emotional bond, the deeper the bond means one dragon dies, but another doesn't. And I think that it might have something to do with how many riders the most powerful dragons have. Maybe that equates to how much emotional damage that they can take, how many deep bonds they can lose. Because you have to think that Taryn is 50 years older than Sigale. That is half his life because he's 100. That's double the riders he could have already had. And I say this is different because we know Sigale is one of the, I think she's the top 3 most powerful dragons. So, like, clearly it should affect her more deeply if it was solely about the most powerful to, like, one rider. But then who knows? Say she's bonded to Xaden for 30 more years. Is it a situation where there's been a rider that's lived that long and bonded this deeply over a cause like this, that then changes the dynamic of their bond and whether or not the dragon would die. Like, how far have they ever gotten with their emotional bonds? And it could just be way more deeply than Rebecca's thought about it. I think Rebecca probably wrote this to be like, no, we want the responsibility on Violet. If she dies, the rest of them die. But I don't want it to be like a mutual thing. So it very well could just be chalked up to that.
Yeah. Or because she knew Xaden was going to be Venom.
Right. But then she also originally planned for it to be Violet first.
Oh, goodness.
So then it's hard because that's what we try to do when we tease out theories and come up with them, right? We try to take the logic of decisions that she's made. And like you're saying right there, well, it would make sense if she had always planned about Xaden. But then it's like, what was she setting up in Fourth Wing before she decided to make it Xaden and not Violet? It just... We'll talk more about that when we get to our Iron Flame recap for Onyx Storm theories. But that's just interesting to think about. Even if they don't stay bonded. I don't think Rebecca will do that, but there's still the question on the table, does Sigale unbond Xaden at the beginning of Onyx Storm?
Oh.
Back in the hallway, they find out that the wards are going down. Mira demands Xaden stay and protect Violet. He actually is like not a fan of that at first. Interesting. As he is leading her to their rooms, we get some more on-page shadow signet context. He can use his shadows to feel and sense people coming before they ever see him, which I know we'd speculated about, but we'd never gotten it on page. So good to see. And I know that Rebecca had some limitations for his second signet we talked about a bit in our predictions, but I'm really glad that she incorporated some shadow detail in for us.
Me too. I love that we got confirmation on this because we speculated, I guess, that he was using his shadows in this way from like the previous conversations about him shielding and therefore not able to use his intrinsic signet to know when people are coming, but he still was like super aware of the oncoming people. So I'm glad that we have the confirmation of that now.
And it was used like this a lot more, but in the Xaden fanfic, I keep telling you all about if you want a little bit more of it, just say. I like need to check and see when the Iron Flame version of that fanfic comes out because I cannot wait. I have to take that in the meantime, of the years that it might take Rebecca if she ever does write it to give us a Xaden POV. So it'd be cool to go back and see the difference between this chapter 27 of the fanfic and.
Do you feel like the fanfic has not changed your perspective, but maybe guided how you see some things?
Yeah, probably. It's been a while since I read the fanfic, but I did it right after I read Iron Flame the first time. So it's been a minute, but I'm sure that there's things that I didn't consider, like his involvement. I think it wasn't as fleshed out as we get to see Rebecca do, because of course she knows what was coming up in Iron Flame, but this was written before Iron Flame came out. So there was a lot of stuff that was still up in the air, but it definitely got me thinking a little bit more outside of the box. And I really appreciated that. Yeah.
For sure.
Because you get to see conversations with like Imogen and Garrick and Liam that you think like, yeah, that had to have happened or something of that nature in order for, Liam to say this or Imogen to feel this way or make this comment. It's really cool. It's really fascinating. If we don't get a Xaden POV book from Rebecca, then anyways, check it out. I'm telling you guys, you'll love it. So then we get what I assume is supposed to be the never before seen scene when Xaden goes to grab his pack from his room and finds Liam. And when I say that this interaction with Liam took me so off guard, I mean, it was jarring for me. Liam shouts at Xaden, demanding twice to know if the wards going down were their fault, implying that he didn't think Xaden was being honest with him the first time he told him it wasn't.
It floored me. It also seems that maybe Liam is less sure about their mission than like I originally thought. Like he knew something bad could happen and he just wouldn't be able to handle it if it was something that was their fault that they caused.
Yeah, I don't know if so much as it's not him being as like dedicated to or like into it as the others. I think he is in it because he cares about other people, right? Like all the civilians left out. So he's wanting to do whatever he can, daggers, to help them, but not at the cost of innocent civilians in the outposts that they're at. And that's what he says there. Like, and I think Xaden thinks that. Xaden says, I wouldn't cost civilians' lives. So we just see that Liam is aligned with the good, the pure, as always, right? The moral, and not one side or the other. And I think the scene was also included so that Xaden could directly explain how and why the wards going down was not their fault to us, the readers.
Yeah.
Which begs the question of who brought them down, which we will come back to shortly. But also, for context, that is absolutely heartbreaking and nobody asked for. This scene takes place only like 2 weeks before War Games, which means that at this point, Liam only had about 2 weeks left.
I'm going to need you to stop, because why would you say that to me right now? Oh, I am dreading. I think we should stop before we get to.
Yeah. That's a really depressing rabbit hole we will not be going down.
Nope.
So they get out onto the roof where they're waiting for their dragons, and Xaden's scanning the sky looking for Taryn when Taryn speaks directly to Xaden. Now, Xaden implies that this is the first time that this has happened, thinking, this behemoth deigns to speak to me, which is like, how dare you? That tells me he hadn't done it before. And so Taryn's telling Xaden here that he needs to scoop Violet up and that she's not going to like it. But this is like huge context, because as far as I can remember, any time that they've spoken, they being Sigale and Taryn, to their non-writer on page, so Sigale to Violet and Taryn to Xaden, has been shared amongst everyone from Violet's point of view. So for Taryn to be able to talk directly to Xaden without Violet hearing them, I assumed that there'd have to be like the shared common space that they've spoken to, not that they could cross over. Maybe it doesn't even have to have anything to do with them being bonded, because Violet has had other dragons talk to her.
Yeah.
Maybe without their writer. Yeah, because when she talked to Coda, I don't think that Melgren could hear. It's not implied. Where I was going with this is thinking that it could come into play with future books so long as Sigale doesn't unbond Xaden, but that actually doesn't have to happen for him to be able to talk directly to her, because dragons can do that to whoever they please. It's just really frowned upon, but mostly because humans talking to dragons doesn't respect the hierarchy between them.
Yeah.
So I guess dragons can really just talk to whoever they want.
Every time we have like a conversation, I'm like, I need to go back and I need to reread the whole thing over again, because apparently I didn't do a good enough job in my 3 reads of these books.
Well, I didn't catch that until I just said that. So that's what's fun about getting to talk about it. And that's what's cool about listeners who then send things in, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about it like that. And at this point, we just pick up on different things as we go. And that's what makes it really, really fun. Because if it was all obvious, then it's like, okay, well, what do we talk? I mean, yeah, it's fun to talk about, but like
boring.
It just adds like extra excitement to it. So
it makes sense why Taryn had to talk directly to Xaden here without Violet hearing.
Yeah.
Because if she had heard, she would have definitely been more likely to run and like had more time to do so instead of being taken so off guard. Like it had to be hidden from her, because they're all working together for their common goal of saving Violet.
Right. Well, and I think it makes me wonder what else Taryn says to Xaden from this point on that Violet doesn't know about.
Oh, we won't know.
All right. Yeah, that we're just going to have to guess until we get more POVs. But we will now know to look out for that. Like, when were they scheming, Anyways. So at this point, everyone else has mounted their dragons except for Xaden and Violet. And Xaden thinks to himself, Violet isn't going to leave on her own accord. I can see it in her eyes, feel it in the tense lines of her back. So all of that is body language, right? I drop my shields. We know what that means. And her emotions hurtle down the bond. Determination, fear, she's going to bolt. He interrupts his own thoughts. She's going to bolt. I think that was her intention, and he used his intrinsic ability and read that intention.
I agree. And it was such a fun little tidbit, because we were talking about like it can't have spoilers because this is in Fourth Wing. But it's a little nugget Easter egg that is only for those people who have read both books already, where
Right?
now we know, because if you hadn't read Iron Flame, you would just be like, oh, he is looking at her body language and he just knows her that well. He's intuitive or something like that.
Boy, are they on it. They just don't know yet. And exactly, right? Like, we knew she would likely need to disguise it, and I wondered how without making it obvious. And she both did the thing where she told us by saying, I lift my shields. She told people who've been reading and how much we've talked about how big of a role him having to not be shielding to be able to read intentions. But then she gave that disguise. It's perfect. Great. I would have rather had it just straight up. But you know what, Rebecca? I think that was a really good job. You did a good job.
It was a good way to do it.
Yeah, to be able to put his intensive signet on the page in a safe way. It is interesting, though, when you compare this part to Violet's point of view. She hasn't on page decided to bolt yet. She doesn't indicate that other than being like, I don't want to go. And she's begging him. But at that point, she was thinking it might have worked because she sees so much compassion in his eyes. She's like, oh, he understands. Like, he might let me stay. She says something along those lines, or like insinuates that. And I'm wondering if this is what Rebecca, Yarros, and Xaden meant when he said it's the second before you make a decision that is the intention that he gets. Because her next move would have been to bolt, theoretically, right? She just hadn't made it to that point, and then he kissed her, distracting her. So she didn't have a chance to actually fully fledged think the intention. It was the second before.
That's so good.
We said, if we got something, she was going to give us context, and we always look at it like, what does this tell us about how his signet works? And that is kind of all we really can pull from it, I think, for now.
Yeah.
But I'm really hopeful that we get the Iron Flame holiday bonus chapters that will give us like a direct piece of context that way. But it's still in line with everything that we've been speculating. And finally, we get to know Xaden's intentions and thoughts for their kiss. I have to read a portion of it because it just deserves it. I kiss her like this might be the last time she'll let me. Like this is an alternate reality, and there's a chance she could love me back. I kiss her like she's mine. It's a stolen moment. It can never be anything more, but it's ours. That is so romantic.
Oh my gosh.
It tells us so much about how, we've talked about it through this episode. This big point that we've gotten is how he's accepted it. He's in the acceptance stage, but he's held back by valuing the perception of her from others and how it will affect her life. And so he's saying, I'm just letting go in this kiss, because she describes it as he's not holding back like he was with their first. And she even says something very, very similar in hers about it being like the last time. I just think it's so sweet and it's so sad.
I'm just taking a moment and just like listening to you like read it. And I was just like, oh my gosh.
It's so sweet.
Oh.
And this like alternate reality where there's a chance she could love me back.
Oh, that
I also want to point out, this is the second excerpt that I've read that I've been like fangirling over, right? Both of them, he says, like she's mine. And that's a really common theme from both Violet and Xaden's perspective. And I don't know if that's just like something that Rebecca really loves to write. Like that's just one of her romance go-tos. Or fated mates. Just...
And Darna also called Violet mine.
Is so often that it's like either Rebecca, you're really, really emphasizing this, like, it's not a trope, but it is like this phrasing. Really love it, or it's emphasized for reasons.
I'd be interested to know, because I've never read any of her regular romance novels, what kind of language she would use for a non-fantasy romance.
Right.
To know if it's just her writing style or if it is something that we...
Well, if any of our listeners have read any of her other books,
yeah,
please let us know if this is a typical thing for her. The only other thing I want to say about this part is that sentence ends with, like, she's mine. And then the next, it's a stolen moment. It can never be anything more, but it's ours.
Mm.
There's something so romantic about that because we've seen both of them go mine, mine, mine at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know this chapter really is like the catapult for them actually starting to become a thing together. So this, like, it's ours.
Now we got to add ours, the Taylor Swift song Ours.
I thought about that, and then I looked at the lyrics, and I was like, but you know what? Yeah, this love is ours. All right, now we've got to add it. We'll have a million. We'll have 13 songs for this chapter. Anyways.
Is it actually 13?
No, it's I think it's 4, but now 5. Which is like normally we do 2 for like our upcoming episodes. So this is like a lot. But we finally get one chapter where he's like head over heels so far.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest with Violet's like different stages. He's just full-fledged. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God, you get every love song Taylor Swift's ever written. We talk about this particular part of this scene, right, with this distraction kiss more in depth in episode 12, where we go through Violet's point of view. But I really just want to point out that based on everything we've learned so far in this chapter and right here, that I don't think that this is a distraction that is unforgivable, knowing that he was in love with her and wasn't just like using her sexual attraction for him to get what he wanted, which just seems like a little bit more sinister. Like, yes, he used it, but it was actually him saving her and her friends. It's not just Violet at stake here, right? It's also his wing.
Yeah.
But it was deeper than that for him. And it's not like the kiss itself wasn't genuine. We know just how genuine it was. He made that abundantly clear, as well in the compassion in his eyes that Violet notes before the kiss. Of course, you know, it's clear to stay in his mind, so...
I totally understand Violet seeing this as unforgivable from her point of view, especially with her just thinking that he was using her attraction pretty much against her, you know? But seeing what he's actually feeling in this moment, and it's just his desperation to get her out of there, to get his wing out of there, like you said. And then specifically when he's kissing her, a chance that she could love me back in an alternate reality. My heart kind of broke for him here too.
I think it's one of my favorite lines. I think I've said that through this whole chapter.
We should make a drinking game.
But it does. It encapsulates like what we now know from this chapter going through the rest of our deep dive of Fourth Wing. This is what he's grappling with. So all those things that Violet interprets as like him being cold.
Yeah.
But I also get it because it's her sister. Again, romantic development, they have to have some misunderstandings. But he knew here that he was risking her not forgiving him. He even says it to Sigale. And I'm with Sigale when she responds, if she can't forgive you for the least of your transgressions, then she doesn't deserve you. And then Xaden says, I don't think she'll see it that way. And Sigale comes back with, then you'd better start praying to your gods that her sister survives. And I do think that this helps explain why Xaden wanted to be there with Violet when they found out if Mira was alive immediately in the next chapter.
Ooh.
So remember, he shows up with the coffee, and it's like,
yeah,
you've been like not speaking to her for weeks up until, and then now you're like showing, which I thought was displaying like his level of care for her, and it is. But now we get the context of, because he was afraid she wasn't going to forgive him. And I think that was probably implied.
Maybe implied, but I definitely missed it.
We're kind of also told that Mira isn't, like, he doesn't care about her and whether she lives or dies. So then,
that's true. All good points. I also loved that side of Sigale too, because she was sassy and a little sweet earlier, but we haven't seen this almost maternal moment from her like that. And my heart literally like swelled like the Grinch's heart. Whenever she said that if she can't forgive you, then she doesn't deserve you. We mentioned this earlier, but you can feel how much she really does love Xaden.
There's a lot of things that we could take away from this chapter.
Such a good chapter.
Their deep bond is one of the most, I really do think Rebecca was so on point with setting that up, knowing that we were going into Onyx Storm next. It's so good. Oh. And now, time to join our riot as we take flight into our foreshadowing, Easter eggs, and theories section. So for the sake of time, we sort of rattle these off, but there will likely be some reactions, Karen. I am excited to see from you. Okay, so this thing with Dane. There are two strange thoughts that Xaden had about Dane that really struck me as odd. First, when Dane meets back up with them to escape, Xaden thinks, quote, "Is it just me, or is he already out of breath as we climb through the third floor and onto the roof?" Then, when Dane is mounting Kath, Xaden thinks he heads down the rampart toward Kath, but he's nowhere near as fast as Liam. Now, I know that, like, Liam is supposed to be, like, this all-star at basically everything, but, like, it's strange because Violet's never mentioned anything but Dane being strong and capable as a rider. It would be so Rebecca to use this as a way to set up for something else, but usually, like, a physical detail like this, like something temporary, like being out of breath, would come into play much sooner than 2 books out. The only thing in this chapter that I can think it could lend to is the wards going down. Why would he take the wards down? The thing to protecting Navarre, right? Or that he was using his signet, which can be physically exhausting to them, on something huge to exhaust him. But then where did he have the time? Because he was just with Violet, Xaden, and Mira being lectured. And then while they're still having that conversation is when they find out the wards go down.
He was gone at one point.
Right. But then who would he be using his signet on? He doesn't stick around to have it be useful.
He's been training for 2 years, and he's squad leader.
Who then gets promoted to wing leader.
Yeah, he shouldn't be out of shape at all. I thought it could have been Xaden just picking at him because of their feud. But now you mention these questions, and now I'm, like, wondering what it could be.
Well, it seemed out of place, especially because of the, is it just me or? I feel like usually Xaden's pretty confident in his judgment. I say judgment when he's, like, being petty. And I guess it could be, like, snarky, like, is it just me or? But you just, like, say that out loud. Like, it seemed like a strange thing to think. It sounded like genuine, like, is it? Am I just seeing things? Or his, because it's strange that it was meant to be pointed out as if that was an abnormal thing. I don't even understand how wards would be taken down like this, since we know that it requires a lot of alloy being removed, like moved out. And Xaden says it would only happen if the power is compromised or stolen. This is an outpost where the ward is extended. So my understanding is that there isn't a ward stone to break or compromise, right? And clearly they get the wards back up at some point. So they did it somehow, meaning it couldn't have been broken. Again, it's an outpost though. So the only clue I can see to the wards going down that wasn't them moving out their alloy, because Xaden makes that clear, is Dane.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm, like, spiraling because we know that Dane is already basically being used by his dad. So, like, what if there is some people like his dad or his dad who are organizing some kind of attacks? Like, I don't know. Just thinking out.
Well, it's interesting that you went there because that's actually my next. So, Xaden tells us the wards going down means that there are enemies within the keep at Montserrat. And this makes me think that he means Venin, not like Griffin riders. Maybe that's the case, but I just jumped to that. And I wonder if this is, one, setting up some kind of betrayal. Again, the marked ones didn't take on the wards, so who did? I don't think it'd be anyone that we wouldn't know, because then, like, why is that significant for her to have emphasized? So, with your point about Dane's dad, if he was the one that did this, he's Navarrian leadership. why would he want the wards taken down if he wasn't Venin? And I actually think that it's likely that Dane's dad is Venin, and that Dane was given some sort of instructions to take out the wards with some sort of justification from his dad. But again, how would he take them down? That's where I go back to, is like, it doesn't make sense because he can't physically move all that stuff out, but like something, he was out of breath for something. Or like maybe his dad was doing it to set up the marked ones. It's just something very suspicious there that I feel like Rebecca was setting up.
Even setting up the marked ones is wild, but could totally make sense.
That's the only thing I can think of with like what we know about Dane's dad.
Yeah.
For to be sure, like we know that he tries to do that with Athbin, but that is supposedly coming after Dane reads Violet's memory about Athbin, and she doesn't know it yet. So that can't be it.
There's so much going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
I worry that if it's not Dane and Xaden saying there's enemies within the keep already, that it's someone we know that's going to betray. Like, we're going to find out is like on, I would assume, the side of the Venin, but at the same time, why would Venin even want the wards to go down so that the Griffins could infiltrate and get more daggers that could then kill them, unless they wanted more fighting? And there's something else here that we don't have context for.
Yeah. Wow.
So, I don't know. I hope it's explained in Storm.
Same.
Next, I noticed that every Xaden POV so far has featured Xaden feeling jealousy. And at first, he wasn't like fully accepting that it was jealousy. He was like hinting toward that unpleasant feeling, whatever. We've seen this gradual increase of this jealousy thing. I'm wondering if this is a hint that one of Violet's exes will be making an appearance in Onyx Storm, and that this jealousy factor will play a bigger role. We will talk about this more in our Iron Flame prep for Onyx Storm, but there is this really cool theory that I've mentioned before. I'll see if I can find the link for it, about Halden, Aric's older brother. I think it's Halden. Okay. And he's the heir to the Navarian throne, that he is Violet's ex, and that he will come for Aric in Onyx Storm, hence stirring up all of the things.
What?
Which is a really, really cool theory.
I know you've mentioned this theory before. I kind of forgot until now, but I also haven't actually read the theory.
It's long. Oh, it's in depth. I'll have to send it to you.
Yes, please do. We know she has exes. I kind of forget about them, and we don't know who they are. So that would be a super interesting reveal. But you would think that if it was true, Aric would have thrown it in Xaden's face or something, because in Iron Flame, he hates Xaden because Xaden killed his other brother. So why not be like, yeah, your girl used to date my brother? I don't know.
Yeah, like throwing it in his face. You know, I think I wouldn't actually expect that from Aric, because I think that he actually like cares for Violet as a friend. And Violet is keeping his secret about being an heir to the throne and his name and all of that. So he's not going to want to piss her off. So I think there's room for Rebecca to use that excuse as to why it hasn't been thrown in Xaden's face. I think I would love it. I don't want a love triangle.
Yeah.
But I would really love to see, because it gets, and we'll discuss this way more when we go through the very in-depth theory, but the idea, because he's the heir to the throne, and Violet could never, she wasn't statused like that, right? At that point. But now she's the most powerful rider. So she is statused. And what better to get her on your team for Navarre as the queen? So it could be very messy. Like, I don't think that's going to actually go. I don't think Violet would go through with it. But if Xaden is turned Venin and he's like, oh, you should be with him for her sake.
Whoa.
I don't know. That's a whole, it's really cool, but there's something with this jealousy trope that I think is going to be intertwined way more than we've already seen it. Like these hints even about Liam, they're setting up for this being a sensitive thing for Xaden. an
Right.
overly confident person otherwise, who has never experienced being in love with someone before. He's always been lusted after himself. Yeah, I think it's going to happen. Xaden also finally tells us what Violet smells like, which just sounds like a strange sentence. But it's apparently a thing that they talk about. They like scent each other a lot. Violet always talks about how he smells like mint. And I had just noticed this back in chapter 9 that he doesn't ever fulfill like what he thinks she smells like. He thinks, Gods, she smells really fucking good like, and then Sigale cuts him off. Why are you thinking about what she smells like? Don't you think? Something like that. And I remember thinking like, that's strange. I want to know what he thinks. We're like, it's drilled into our minds from Violet. And so I thought it was notable. But in this chapter, he says she smells like some kind of citrus. Karen, who do we know that is allergic to some kind of citrus?
Shut up.
I didn't put this on there earlier so that you wouldn't see it. And for just to point out in case anyone is confused, Jack is allergic to oranges. No, you're good. I know you're processing. Jack's allergic to oranges.
Oh my gosh.
I just feel like it's super symbolic that Violet smells like the very thing that could kill Jack. And I just feel like it's likely foreshadowing that she will eventually kill him.
Wow.
I feel like that's not a far jump.
No, I think
there.
that I glossed over the smell conversation. I didn't put it together at all. Wow.
My first thought was, oh my God, we finally know what she smells like. And then I was like, some kind of citrus. Rebecca, you could have just said oranges at that point. I don't know. But I thought that was really cool. And we find it's like one of those small little payoffs. It's really great. And finally, Xaden says, lying is easy except when it comes to Violet. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. I have seen some people speculate that this could be a hint for Violet being a truthsayer as her second signet. I will say, while I could see Rebecca doing something like that, I don't personally think that this is the case because Endarn is still a Feathertail at this point. So her second signet didn't manifest, as we understand it, until after her dreamless sleep on page somewhere in Ironflame. But could be. It could have also been one of those like drops of electric and thunder and, you know, all those little Easter eggs that were like, oh, okay, well, she ended up being a lightning wielder. Well, I bet we understood it first. What do you think?
I've seen a couple of theories about the signets, and I feel like this one is one of the more believable ones because Rebecca Yarros says it's more anticlimactic of a signet. Not that this wouldn't be an important signet, but it's not wielding lightning. And then what's the thing that she needs more than anything else? Information and truth.
Right. I could totally see it being that. Where I struggle with it is we know that Xaden keeps a lot of secrets. And Rebecca really likes for us to find out things in time. If she's a truthsayer, does that kind of blow Rebecca's cover a little? But then maybe it's some sort of truthsayer. It's not direct. Yeah. Maybe it's like an influential that takes time to really grow and be impactful. Where it's not like the same way there's a character in Ironflame that we know in the interrogation room that could just immediately know if someone's lying. So I don't think that that's hers, or we would know that on page. Maybe it is and just been disguised, but maybe it's like a version of a signet, like intentions is of an intrinsic.
Is it just harder to lie to her? Maybe that's why he keeps the secrets, because he can't lie. If he says anything, he will tell her the truth.
And that would actually go really well with the whole don't ask me that question thing that he says in Ironflame. Why can't she just ask it? Like, I thought that was just like a writing style on Rebecca's part, but I don't know. I'm really excited to like reread Ironflame with that perspective in mind. I'm not convinced yet, but I could see it.
I'm so excited to figure out what it is.
This was supposed to be like a shorter bonus episode, right? And we're 2 hours into recording this because there's so much from a single chapter that we can get. That's crazy to me that Rebecca can fit that much in. I feel like we didn't actually go detail by detail sometimes like we normally do with the steps in this chapter, because we're saving that for like Violet's perspective to really hit like the key points in here. And it's already so much to talk about.
Well, it gave us so much context for stuff that we've already been asking and talking about.
Just a single chapter can do that. That's crazy to me.
It just shows why you need other people's points of view.
Right. Well, this has been wonderful. I am so pleased that we got to, first of all, experience this chapter before we recorded our chapter 27 of Violet's perspective, because you're right, like it does change things and we get so much more context. And that is not just the case for number 27, but also the rest of the book. It's just crazy to me how much a bonus chapter from Xaden's point of view can shift things.
It's so good, and I hope we get more. But you guys, this episode, like Hannah said, ended up being way longer than we expected, but I feel like we really had great conversations and theories and all this stuff. Oh, so good. Now I have so much to think about, and I'm just going to be sitting here staring at the wall thinking about all of this for the rest of the night.
That's our life now.
It is. Well, that wraps up our new Xaden POV chapter 27 bonus episode. Thank you so much for joining in on our fangirling. And don't forget to join us for our next episode where we will continue to deep dive on Fourth Wing through the lens of Iron Flame.
Yes, if you are enjoying our content so far, please leave us a review. You can also check out our new Patreon. Follow us over on socials where we have a giveaway for this new chapter, Paperback Fourth Wing, going on right now, and share to all of your Fourth Wing friends.
As always, we encourage you to email us all of your thoughts, theories, and suggestions, or drop them below if you are watching on YouTube, or join us over on our Discord.
Until next week, dearest fantasy readers, prepare for more fangirling, theories, and Easter eggs as we continue our journey through the Empyrean series. We're just going into rabbit holes today, but we had so much context with this bonus chapter, right? Like, how do you not go down rabbit holes or dragon holes?
So true.
That sounds strange. Dragon caves. But then you don't really get the meaning.